Hi, this is Stephen from Owner Disown. Today I am reviewing the Asus Zephyrus G14, which I bought from Best Buy for $1,450. It's not a review unit, so there's no bias whatsoever, and if you feel that it has helped you in your purchase, please consider subscribing to support my channel. First, let's look at the specs. My unit has the Ryzen 9 4900HS 8-core CPU with a base clock of 3 GHz and single core boost of 4.3 GHz and a TDP of 35 watts. This is 10 watts less than the regular H series, and Asus has a 6-month exclusivity on it. The max temperatures of these new Ryzen CPUs is 105 degrees, and believe me, I have come close to that many times, especially on the G15. They also will be offering a Ryzen 7 4800HS, which I reviewed on the G15. It's not necessarily going to be any cooler, but you will lose some performance. Graphics wise, my unit has the 65 watt RTX 2060 Max-Q, and there will also be a 60 watt GTX 1660 Ti Max-Q model. My model has a 120Hz 14-inch 1080p IPS level display, which I recommend for gaming with adaptive sync to stop tearing. Its FreeSync range is 48 to 120 Hz. And according to their spec sheet, there is also a 60Hz 1080p display with no adaptive sync, so for gaming I don't recommend that one. Asus does offer a 2560 by 1440 60Hz panel available that also does have FreeSync, but for a 14-inch display I don't see the need for that. My G14 has a default scaling of 150%, but this did make some applications not fit the screen properly, such as Cinebench that had some of the display cut off. In my Magix video editing software, details in my project folder were cut off and the timeline would be pretty unusable. Switching to 125% scaling was much more manageable. Adobe Premiere Pro didn't seem so bad, but I found 125% to work across the board. The G14 has a sizable 76 watt-hour battery, which lasted me 7 hours 39 minutes streaming YouTube at 25% brightness, or 1.5 hours playing Far Cry 5. Sure, you take a performance hit, so you probably want to lower settings, but it's good to know if you want to play on a train or something like that. And that leads me to one of the main selling points of the G14. It is so portable and small that it's great for anyone that travels a lot. Here's a shot of it on top of my 13.9-inch Aorus and my 15-inch Mech G3. It really is compact. And at only £3 11 ounces or £4 14 ounces with that 180 watt power brick, it is amazingly light for the power this thing really has. On the left is an air exhaust. The power socket is in the center, which can be a little bit awkward at times, blocking the HDMI 2.0B. You have a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C with DisplayPort 1.4 and also power delivery and a combo headphone mic jack. You can use a USB-C charger to power the laptop, but even if you use a 130 watt one, you will not get the full frame rate. It will just be like gaming on battery. If you are considering using an external monitor, I did hit a snag. Using the HDMI port on either my 3840 by 1600 or 2560 by 1440 monitor, I tried to create a custom resolution using the Radeon settings, and it said that they were not compatible, and using the Windows settings the resolutions were just grayed out. I tried using a Thunderbolt 3 cable, but I would not get a signal, and unfortunately I didn't have another USB-C cable or adapter to test out for the DisplayPort. On the right we have a regular USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C. You have two USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type-A's, an air vent and a Kensington lock. I usually have my mouse cable plugged into the left hand side with the cable looped behind the laptop, but after a bit I got used to it being plugged in on the right. The rear has just two air vents, but it has a nice silver etched metal plate and a Zephyrus etched between the vents. It's nice touches like this that show Asus put a lot of thought into the G14. You can either purchase a grey or a white one like mine. Both are made out of magnesium alloy, and I found that my white model didn't show fingerprints or dirt. And if yours does, it is easy to wipe clean. You will notice half of the lid has a series of holes, which is for the Matrix display model that launches in June for $1,999. It's a cool feature that allows you to configure an animated GIF or text, but I'm sure after a while the novelty will wear off, as it's one of those things that you don't see unless you sit in front of a mirror. I understand that there is a membrane beneath the holes to stop spilt fluids from damaging the panel. As is common with Asus laptops, it makes use of their ergo lift hinge that raises the back to allow more airflow. So I tested the G14 with the lid closed, and as you can see, it lowers the CPU watts, and in this case from 29 watts to 19 watts, and thus lowers its clock rate. The GPU clock rate remains unchanged, so you can still game just as well, and neither the CPU or the GPU overheated. If anything, the CPU gets cooler. Unlike the lid, the keyboard deck is not white but an anodized silver, reminding me a little bit of the Surface Book. You will notice two up-facing tweeters. The one-piece Windows Precision touchpad is quite large. It is smooth glass and tracking and gestures work very well. You will not be disappointed. The clicking actuation was solid with a noticeable click sound, and it was uniform across its length. The keys are fairly large with good spacing, and I found them good to use. They can be a bit difficult to see in semi-light though, not dark enough for the backlighting to make any difference. In fact, the backlighting made it harder to see in this situation. To the right, you have large arrow keys which are used to alter the white backlighting, which in itself is serviceable, but unfortunately the lighting is not uniform across all of the keys. It does have 3 levels of brightness. The power button doubles as a fingerprint reader. It worked perhaps 75% of the time for me. And at the top you have dedicated buttons for volume up, volume down, mic on and mic off, and a button that opens up the Armoury Crate software. I would have liked to have seen a mute button here, so instead you have to press FN+1. Is the 1080p panel any good? Well, certainly the colours are vivid and details are good. In this regard, it is like the G15 panel and better than the TUF A15. As you can see from this chart, it is comparable to the G15 with 96% of sRGB versus only 62% on the TUF A15. So for video and photo work, I think it will be fine. Peak brightness is good too, at 332 nits as shown by the green bars. Just trailing the G15 even at lower brightness levels, but once again, much better than the TUF A15. The G14 has nice slim bezels, but forgoes a webcam in doing so. The panel itself is quite thin and has some flex to it. Even though it doesn't have a glossy display, it doesn't cope with bright light at all well, so if you're thinking of using this in the park, make sure it is a cloudy day. Now, Notebook Check said that the panel has a black and white to response time of 35 milliseconds, and I can fully believe it when I look at my ghosting tests. On the left is the 60Hz panel and on the right is the G14. They are pretty similar, I would say, and compared to a typical 144Hz panel, it is definitely worse. But it is fair to say that although I'm sure there are some people that would notice it, I did not notice any ghosting in game, and I put hours into this thing. I pushed it very hard. For me, tearing is a bigger issue, and compared to a 60Hz panel, this was night and day. Backlight bleed was very minimal though. The underside is also made out of grey anodized magnesium, and interestingly, you see that unlike the G15, the fan air intakes are not blocked off, but this time they block off the centre vents which were open on the G15. The 76 Wh battery takes up most of the bottom, and either side you will notice 2 downward firing speakers, making for 4 in total. Now there is only one M.2 slot, and underneath this there is the Intel Wi-Fi 6 AX200 card, which is user replaceable. Asus gives you access to one DIMM slot, so I have 8GB here with another 8GB soldered to the motherboard. Now their spec sheet does say there's a max of 32GB, so there must be a 16GB DIMM model out there. The cooling does look more robust than the G15 with 3 heat pipes for both the GPU and the CPU, and 2 of them are shared. But you do have 4 heatsinks versus only 3 on the G15, and a separate heat pipe for the power delivery components. The centre of the keyboard and the top near the hinge got uncomfortably hot under load, probably one of the hottest I have felt. Now cool air is at least brought in through the keyboard, so at these points like the WASD keys, it is cool. Underneath it is a bit hotter, even hitting 50 degrees, so I would definitely not game with this on your lap. Fan noise isn't bad though, they do spin up all the time, but at idle they are very quiet. Step it up to performance mode, we are still only at 46 decibels, and at turbo mode 49. But with 100% fan, we are at a whopping 59 decibels, so make sure you don't disturb anybody. Fortunately, the speakers are one of the best I have heard. It's got good bass, clear and loud, and here it is versus a regular laptop. Audio is handled by Dolby Atmos software, which was very good, and it was interesting to hear it adjust what it played using the dynamic mode. It would automatically adjust if you were listening to just talking or listening to music. Now, one of my viewers, Jay Smith, has been searching for a portable laptop that doesn't cost the earth and passes my latency mon test, so I am pleased to say that I think this could be it for you, Jay. I was asked if it would be compatible with Linux, so I fired up Ubuntu and had no problems navigating the web, accessing files or their applications. Updates and drivers can be downloaded from the My Asus app, and their Armoury Crate shows system temperatures, clock speeds, as well as the 5 performance modes, culminating in manual. You can change the fan speeds of the CPU and the GPU, as well as overclock the RTX 2060. The BIOS is rather limited though. Probably the main reason to go into it would be to flash it. I have already done a separate video comparing how the 4900HS stacks up against the 4800HS, the 4800H and the i9 9880H. Suffice it to say, it beats out the i9 and matches the 45W 4800H, so it is very impressive. It's perfect for encoding, rendering or anything else you want to throw at it. So let's look at gaming. Performance mode boosts the GPU by 100 MHz and manual mode a max of 150 MHz. At the top is Far Cry 5 using performance, in the center we use turbo mode, and at the bottom is manual mode with the 150 MHz boost clock. Performance sees the CPU at about 90 degrees and 28 watts, the GPU at about 1440 MHz. Now turbo mode increases the power to the CPU to about 36 watts, so we see a higher boost clock at the expense of worse thermals, and the GPU does boost higher and remains cool. Manual mode with the max fan sees the CPU fluctuate between 91 and 84 degrees at 35 watts, and the GPU pushes up to about 1620 MHz. Frame rates are good, and manual mode commands a slight advantage over turbo, but the extra fan noise is not worth it. And to be fair, performance mode is not far behind turbo, so that would be the best profile to use here. Here is Rainbow Six Siege using ultra settings. Performance mode is at the top, and in this game the 4900HS is pulling 41 watts, which is too much to cool. We are seeing 95 degrees on the CPU. Underneath I am using the Windows Power Saver mode. We are now at a more reasonable 28 watts and 80 degrees, and the difference in frame rate is negligible in my opinion. I actually used this setting on the G15 and it was my recommended setting. Here is a chart showing how the different main power profiles compared at various quality settings. You see good scaling, and with a minimum of 86 FPS, I found gameplay to be very smooth. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I compare Power Saver at the top, Performance in the center, and Manual with Max Fan at the bottom. Now even in Power Saver mode we get up to 97 degrees, and in Performance mode it even hit 100 degrees. But with the Max Fan we see a nice 78 to 80 degrees, so go figure. Again, there is very little to choose from in terms of frame rates, just pick the one that cools the best. In Overwatch, performance mode would generally stay at 90 degrees with the odd spike to 96, but turbo mode would run anywhere from 88 degrees to 95. And manual with max fan, we would see 83 to 92 degrees. So yeah, you get quite wide swings, but certainly those max fans do help. If you decide to just use the integrated Radeon graphics, which has 8 cores, here is Overwatch at medium settings, and it gives you a smooth 77 FPS. There was quite a bit of a difference in frame rate between the performance mode and the rest, as you can see here at Epic settings, but a 1% low of 95 is great. If you decide to lower settings, then you get very good scaling. I was asked to test DLSS 2.0, so I fired up Control and showed DLSS off at the top and on at the bottom. Now this is with ray tracing set to medium and using high settings. I didn't see anything wrong with the DLSS image, and it gave a welcome boost in frame rate. In fact, we saw a 49% boost in frame rate, which is excellent and certainly makes a strong case for the RTX 2060 model over the 1660 Ti. So how would I sum up the Asus Zephyrus G14? Well, aesthetically it is definitely nicer than the TUF A15 and the G15. The magnesium alloy makes it lightweight and more premium, so in that regard the extra $50 over the G15 does make sense, especially since it has the faster 4900HS processor. This screen is very nice. Sure, it has a higher response time, but give me no tearing any day of the week, and for content creation work it is fine. Sure, It is small, but setting it to 125% scaling solves most issues. I was perplexed why I couldn't use the HDMI to output at a higher resolution on an external monitor though. Battery life and speakers were awesome though. This laptop should last you a good portion of the day, and its speakers will certainly fill a medium-sized room nicely. I do wish it had an SD card reader and another M.2 slot, as that 1TB drive will fill up fast. You get decent frame rates at max settings in most games. Thermals could be a bit better, but generally you can find the best power or fan option to suit you. And you certainly cannot complain about the power of the 4900HS processor. In my comments, everyone is talking about these Ryzen processors, and for good reason. You may have heard of the black screen issue on the G14, and I certainly had it twice in my first day. Basically, I uninstalled all the AMD drivers with the AMD cleanup utility. I then updated the BIOS to 2.11 and reinstalled the AMD drivers using the Windows Update. And if you do have the issue, you can press Windows Control Shift and B, and that resets the driver. Thanks for watching. My next video on the G14 will be dedicated to gaming, so make sure you are subscribed to watch that.